everyone. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Lindsay Reiser, and here is a look at the top stories we're following right now. Flags are flying half-staff at the White House and around the U.S. as America remembers our 39th president, Jimmy Carter. An emergency safety inspection is ordered on South Korea's entire airline operations system after one of the country's deadliest air disasters. And a deadly storm system rips through the south, spawning tornadoes and leaving behind massive damage from Texas to Georgia. Well, flags across the U.S. will fly at half-staff for the next 30 days as the nation mourns the loss of the only president in American history to reach the age of 100, Jimmy Carter. Cannons are firing every half hour at the West Point Military Academy today in a tribute to the former naval officer who died yesterday at the age of 100. Carter ascended from a family peanut farm to the nation's highest office, where he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for his diplomatic efforts after leaving office. Back in 2018, he told CBS News what he hoped people will remember him for.
How do you want to be remembered?
Well, with my family, I hope I could be remembered as a good great-grandfather and a good grandfather and a good father. By my wife, I hope I can be remembered as a good husband. But in politics, as a champion of peace and human rights.
We have team coverage for you this morning. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is live in Atlanta. Our Mark Strassman is in the former president's hometown of Plains, Georgia. And Ed O'Keefe is monitoring political reaction out of West Palm Beach, Florida. Let's go ahead and start in Atlanta with Skylar Henry at the headquarters for really one of Carter's most enduring legacies, the Carter Center. So, Skylar, tell us about how people are paying tribute there.
Hey, Lindsay, good morning to you. Well, in the hours and really days following the announcement of President Carter's death, we've seen many people flock here to the Carter Center with flowers, even a jar of peanuts, all marking their remembrance of the man that they say meant so much to not only the city of Atlanta, but to the state of Georgia, as well as around the world. One person that we heard from yesterday said that the former president was one of her favorite people, with her boyfriend being the second person who happened to be one of her favorites, but saying that ultimately she was just so admirable of the work that he was able to accomplish around the world, really saying that he and his wife, Rosalind Carter, were beacons for so many around the world as it relates to health and democracy and bringing about peace to certain war-torn countries as well, and really the work that they have been able to do throughout the Carter Center for the last 40-some-odd years. And really, if you listen to the old story, they say that this is a place that came to the former president in a dream, knowing that he did not want to rest on his laurels of what he was able to accomplish during his time in office, whether that is bringing about that peace agreement in the Middle East or figuring out a nuclear arms agreement with the then Soviet Union, or even his humanitarian assistance that he was able to accomplish at that time. He knew that there was more that he wanted to accomplish, and obviously with the help of his wife Rosalind, as well as others, they were able to establish this center and also do so much around the world. I talked about health, eradicating worm disease in Guinea. That is certainly significant, considering that is the second human disease in history to be eradicated after smallpox. He knew that this is something that he wanted to move forward with as it relates to just doing more for people throughout the world. And then also, the stuff that he was able to accomplish through Habitat for Humanity and other efforts here, helping out the homeless. And I think that many, where Mark is down in Plains, knew him most for those Sunday school sermons that he would help issue, and so many around the world flocked there for that. And so this is really a time that so many really wanted to come out and pay their respects and say thank you to the president for the work that he and his family have been able to accomplish.
How can members of the public pay their respects?
Yeah, well, the Carter Center has established an online book where people can leave their condolences. That's at jimmycartertribute.org. That is for folks who aren't able to attend any of these services in person. We know that before that state funeral up in Washington, D.C., that there will be events here at the Carter Center where the public will be given an opportunity to pay their respects. And so if they are not able or available to do that, they will have their opportunity to leave their condolences online as well.
Skylar Henry, thank you. We now go to Mark Strassman in Plains, Georgia, where former President Carter grew up and where he spent the last years of his life. Mark, there is so much history for the Carter family where you are. What are you hearing from relatives and neighbors so far?
Hey, Lindsay. This, of course, is a moment of intense private family grief for the Carters. We haven't actually seen them out in public making statements or doing anything else so far. Again, completely understandable, of course. Jimmy Carter had 4 children, 11 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren. Chip Carter is one of his 3 sons. He released a statement for us. I'm going to read a piece of it here. My father was a hero not only to me, but to everyone who believes in peace, human rights, and unselfish love. The world is our family because of the way he brought people together. That last phrase, of course, is key, the way he brought people together. That is part of Jimmy Carter's legacy. Back in September, I talked to one of his grandchildren, Jason Carter, and asked him about that legacy. He believes when history casts the final ballot, it'll be a vote for Jimmy Carter.
I think he has always looked for a different judgment than the one that comes from politics. And I think that his faith and his beliefs about this country and the world make him happy with where he is.
And Jason Carter also told me just how lucky he feels, lucky that he had the chance over the last 25 years to work with his grandfather on so many different projects that mattered to Jimmy Carter. And many of those projects, Lindsay, of course, are another part of the Jimmy Carter legacy.
What about the people and the community of Plains? How are they reacting?
I mean, if you've never been to Plains, Lindsay, it's hard to describe just how small of a small town it is. Several hundred people, not a single stoplight. They have an interesting relationship with the Carter family. On the one hand, very proud of the Carters and Jimmy Carter in particular, the way he put Plains on the map. I mean, look at the sign behind me. But they're also protective of the family. And so far, the response has been muted. I think in part just to give the family some space, give them a chance to grieve in private. But no doubt more reaction is going to be coming in the days ahead, Lindsay.
Mark Strassman, thank you so much. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who is covering President-elect Trump from West Palm Beach, Florida. So, Ed, Trump offered some gracious words for Carter, even though the former president said in October he had fulfilled his wish to live long enough to vote for Vice President Harris in the election. What did Trump say, and how would you characterize their relationship?
Notably effusive last night in several social media posts. Lindsay, good to be with you. He said that while he strongly disagreed with Carter, the late president, quote, worked hard to make America a better place, and for that I give him my highest respect. Trump, like President Biden, who we'll get to in a moment, had a much deeper, profound political and personal relationship. Like the other former presidents, Trump sometimes got a little criticism from Carter and sometimes found himself in surprise agreement with him. Carter, of course, having been the longest-serving former president and having been someone who traveled the world, focused on issues like social justice, peace, concern about genocide and war, would often find themselves on the other side of an argument from the sitting president, much to their consternation, because it would ultimately generate headlines. So we should talk through what we've heard from some of them. For example, Bill Clinton now, the only surviving president from the 20th century, the only other deep Southern president, said in a statement yesterday that Carter had worked tirelessly for a better, fairer world. They, of course, aligned almost from the beginning of Carter's presidential ambitions, because Clinton then became the young governor from Arkansas and saw real hope for Democrats in the South, which, of course, eventually led to his election in 1992. George W. Bush had a pretty troubled relationship with Carter when he was serving those 2 terms, most especially over post-9/11 wars and policy, especially the treatment of terrorists and the situation in the Middle East. But Bush said that Carter was, quote, a man of deeply held convictions, and later said that he, quote, dignified the office. That's notable because, of course, Bush himself was also elected to better dignify the office after the Clinton years. So for him to say that about a Democrat is notable. Barack Obama pointed out that Carter had been elected to, quote, always tell the truth, and he did, advocating for the public good, consequences be damned. They usually found themselves in agreement on things, Lindsay, but on the situation in Syria especially, Carter was at times quite critical.
What does it tell you that he's getting praise from top Democrats and Republicans?
Well, again, the work he did after his presidency and sort of how universal it was, the work with Habitat for Humanity, flying to different countries to ensure the freedom of American hostages, working to ensure that elections were held in fragile democracies around the world freely and openly. He was often an election observer with other international organizations. That's the kind of work that Democratic and Republican politicians generally agree with, right? And they also appreciate the fact that he lived such a humble and sort of, faith-based life, something that they all aspire to. We should also point out President Biden, who's vacationing in St. Croix, not too far from here, relatively, said last night, or recounted last night, the 5 decades of friendship that they had. Biden, remember, was a young U.S. senator and the first sitting senator to endorse Carter's presidential campaign back in 1975, 1976, when most of Washington scoffed at the notion that a peanut farmer could become president. But Carter never forgot that Biden was with him early on, and they maintained a close personal and political bond through the rest of their lives. Biden pointing out last night, for example, that when Beau Biden died back in 2015, the Carters were especially concerned about the president and Dr. Biden. So we will see him eulogize Jimmy Carter at his state funeral whenever it is officially announced. Biden had said a few years ago that Carter had asked him to eulogize him. And we're likely to see the other former presidents and their spouses in attendance, should their health allow it, which may mean that we see the former presidents together more than once in the month of January. First at the Carter funeral, which we anticipate will be announced shortly to be next week, but then again conceivably later in the month at the Trump inauguration. And we should point out, in a fluke of sort of tradition and custom, flags are now flying across the country, at least at government facilities, at half staff, and they will for 30 days, which means they'll be at half staff for the Trump inauguration, a nod to decorum and to a tribute to the former president.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, thank you. U.S. aviation officials will assist in the investigation into a deadly plane crash in South Korea over the weekend. At least 179 people died after the aircraft landed on the runway, sped into a barrier, and erupted in flames. It's the deadliest plane crash to ever take place in South Korea. 2 people survived, a male and female flight attendant who were sitting in the back of the plane. Jean McKenzie from our partners at the BBC has the full report.
We're at the crash site now, and you should, behind me, just be able to make out the charred tail of the plane. This is the only part of the plane that is still intact, because that explosion, that crash, was so severe, and there is still so much mystery surrounding the crash. We know that the pilot had to make an emergency landing, that he doesn't seem to be able to have activated his landing gear, but we still don't know why. Now, there are reports that a bird got into the engine and caused a fire, but there's still a lot that doesn't make sense, because birds don't normally cause huge planes like this to crash. There are measures built in to protect against this. And this was an experienced pilot. And South Korea has a good air safety record. But it could be some time before we get the full answers to this. Both of the black boxes, they have been recovered from the crash site here, so the voice recorder and the flight recorder, but the flight recorder has been very badly damaged, and so experts are saying it might be many months before they can get the data off that. It's also taking time to identify the remainder of the bodies. Forensic teams are now taking DNA from some of the families. Many of them have been sleeping here at the airport overnight, up in the terminal building. And this comes at an incredibly difficult time for this country. There is a lot of political instability and uncertainty after the country ousted its president just over 2 weeks ago, when he tried to bring this country under martial law. So its current leader has only been in office now for just over 48 hours. So this is a huge challenge for him going forward, and a huge tragedy for this country. Jean McKenzie for CBS News in Muan Airport, South Korea.
At least 4 people are dead after powerful storms struck parts of the South over the weekend. Around 36 tornadoes were reported from Texas to Georgia. The system is now expected to head to the northeast and could cause headaches for those with New Year's plans. CBS News correspondent Jason Allen has more on the deadly storms.
Now it's really tearing up some.
At least 6 tornadoes tore through Texas this weekend, with extreme winds and large hail, downing trees and flattening homes. Just north of Houston, an EF3 tornado spun up winds reaching 140 miles an hour Saturday. Here in New Caney, Justine and Greg Campbell carried everything out of their home in trash bags. Greg was in the garage when the tornado hit.
I saw the tornado and I sprinted to the door.
But the wind was so strong, neither he or his wife could open the door so he could get inside.
I'm like in the corner, so I don't know what's going on behind me.
In Mississippi, at least 2 people died after a set of violent tornadoes ripped through the state. 18-year-old Tykeria Rogers died after a tree fell on her home in Natchez, about 2 hours southwest of Jackson.
She was a loving person. You couldn't help but to love her, seriously.
40 miles away, neighbors are helping to clean up this home after it was hit by a tornado Saturday afternoon. The roof was completely ripped away. The family said they survived by hiding out in the bathroom with their toddler, who was still upset after the storm.
It's gonna be okay.
I need to get in.
And in northern Alabama, another tornado struck late Saturday night, making Athens town square unrecognizable.
This looks like a completely different place. Absolutely terrible. Haven't seen anything like it. Just sad.
CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak is here now with more on the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Lindsay, good morning. Yeah, we were covering this for the entire weekend. In less than 48 hours, we had dozens and dozens of tornadoes stretching from Texas all the way over to Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and even the panhandle of Florida. The good news now is that we are looking at relief in the south with not only completely severe weather-free conditions, but actually some pretty nice sunshine. So cleanup efforts won't be impacted by any problems coming up. Meantime, across the country, we have some pretty nice weather for the East Coast, for the midsection of the country, but the West Coast is once again going to be victim to this atmospheric river where, as we head into the next couple of days and finish off 24, start 25, rounds of rain coming in, higher elevation snow. We could be looking at an additional 1 to 3 feet of snow for areas like Oregon over toward Utah. In fact, areas just a few miles east of Eugene, Oregon, some of those higher elevations, over 100 inches of snow. Those ski areas in Oregon right now have the deepest snowpack of anybody in the country. We're going to be looking at that, and then along the coast from California up to Washington. Not only that, but winds anywhere between 35 and 45 miles per hour. Take a look at the national forecast for today. Much of the eastern section of the country dealing with rain that has moved off. Mild to finish things off for areas like New York, Philadelphia, down toward D.C. Quiet again in the midsection, and then over toward the north, we're dealing with some snow. The Dakotas could pick up a quick 6 to 12 inches of snow as we head into the last day of 2024. Lindsay?
All right, Andrew Kozak, thank you. If you are headed to the airport this morning, you may be in for some headaches. The TSA says today is one of the busiest days to travel over the holidays. Now, FlightAware is reporting at least 1,300 delays within, into, or out of the U.S., and at least 73 flights have been canceled. Ahead, a big deal for Big Lots, how the company will be able to keep stores open and save jobs around the U.S. You're watching CBS News 24/7. More than 9 million Americans in 21 states will see an increase in their minimum wage starting January 1st. Nearly 1 in 5 of those receiving a bump in pay are below the poverty line. Now, some states can thank state laws that tie the minimum wage to inflation. Others were sparked by legislation or ballot measures. The federal minimum wage hasn't budged since 2009. It remains at $7.25. Big Lots has struck a deal that will allow the company to keep hundreds of its stores and distribution centers open. It filed for bankruptcy in September, saying inflation and high interest rates led to a drop in sales of home and seasonal products. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News business contributor Javier David. So, Javier, a lot of people think Big Lots. I mean, I remember shopping there as a kid, my family. How will this work, and how could this save stores and jobs?
So they're doing something interesting that bankrupt companies rarely do. They're actively trying to keep stores open. They're striking this deal, and a big reason why is because they had this private equity deal that fell through. They were preparing to shutter nearly 1,000 locations. It's a complicated transaction, and it involves them transferring properties to other retailers' companies. But the upshot is it'll keep hundreds of stores open in addition to like a couple of distribution centers. It's going to save thousands of jobs, which is a good time. You know, you don't want to be out of work this time of year. So the big picture view is here. As you mentioned, retail's been struggling. Like, it's inflation, it's an inability to find workers, cost structure, a lot of things that have to do. tough customers that are hard to deal with, and people, that's one of the reasons why it's hard to...
Customers tough? No.
Yeah. So all of that said, they just haven't really found their footing post-pandemic, and a lot of companies are going through this stuff. It's like, last week we just said Party City is shuttering a bunch of stores. So retail, just high inflation, high interest rates, lots of costs, the inability to keep things together, just really proving a real challenge for these companies.
On the other hand, discount grocer Aldi, they say they're going to be expanding, opening 17 new stores across 9 different states. What's the idea behind that, behind their expansion?
Yeah, they're riding the grocery store way, or the discount grocery store way. We all have to eat, and since it's so expensive to do so, the best way to get a leg up is to say you're offering groceries and things that people need on the cheap. So they're a German-based retail chain. They see opportunities to expand here in the U.S. That's a good thing for inflation-hit consumers like us. We're always looking for bargains wherever we can find them. They have a master plan to expand their footprint significantly. The idea is to open up at least 800 new stores across the U.S. by 2028. They want to be operating over 3,000 locations nationwide. So that puts them in the company of some of the largest grocery stores in the country.
All right, let's talk about Costco. A lot of companies are rolling back diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. But Costco's board of directors is saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. They are urging shareholders to vote against this type of action after a group called for them to do so. Why are companies doing this, and why is Costco saying not us?
So this is an interesting test case of sort of the chronicles of DEI, the whole post-2020 wave of corporate diversity. As you mentioned, a number of companies are scaling back, but Costco's doing something that a lot of companies are not. They're pushing back hard. They're leaning into this idea that it's a good thing. They have this treasure hunt shopping experience, and they're not bowing to the pressure. They want
treasure hunt shopping experience. What does that mean?
Well,
you go in and you find something?
They feel like, look, their whole argument is DEI. It helps them attract talent, attract customers, retain all of these, employees, the diversity of employees and the diversity of their customer base, and they want to interact with these people. So basically, they're just trying to say, we're not going to back down. And this is a rarity in this environment where you're getting a lot of pushback and companies are basically just folding.
Okay, Javier, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Gas prices are expected to drop in 2025 for the 3rd straight year, according to Gas Buddy. It forecasts the national average for regular gas to fall to $3.33 a gallon next year. Well, cases of norovirus, a highly contagious stomach bug, are surging in parts of the U.S. this winter, according to the CDC. There were 91 outbreaks of norovirus reported during the week of December 5th. That's up from 69 outbreaks the last week of November. And cases typically spring up in places like schools, nursing homes, cruise ships. Common symptoms of the illness include sudden vomiting and diarrhea, and the best prevention is to wash your hands regularly. And as someone whose self and daughter got this over Christmas, it is not fun. It is fast and furious, so stay healthy out there. Still ahead, former President Jimmy Carter dies after a lifetime devoted to lifting people up and bringing them together. We look at his legacy. Welcome back. Here's a look at the top stories we're following right now. This morning, millions around the country are paying tribute to Jimmy Carter. At 100 years old, he lived longer than any other president in U.S. history. His time in the White House included many accomplishments, but also difficulties. Carter went on to be revered for what he did after he left office. The 118th Congress passed under 150 bills into law over the past 2 years, and that's down from the more than 350 bills passed by the previous Congress. So it was the most unproductive legislative session since the 1980s. That's according to data from public affairs firm Quorum. The 119th Congress convenes this week. 5 people are charged in connection with the death of Liam Payne. The former One Direction singer fell from a 3rd-floor hotel balcony in Argentina in October. The hotel's manager, receptionist, and Payne's friend all face manslaughter charges. 2 other hotel workers have been charged with supplying drugs. Returning now to our top story, the life and legacy of former President Jimmy Carter. The Nobel Peace Prize winner was known for bringing people together. And in an age of increasing division, the bipartisan nature of praise pouring in for Carter is remarkable. I want to bring in Leslie Sanchez and Joel Payne. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Good to see both of you. Leslie, President-elect Donald Trump said that while he may have disagreed politically with Carter on some things, He did call him a truly good man for his work in and out of office. What does it tell you about Carter's legacy that people from all political walks of life are equally passionate in remembering him?
There's no doubt that this was a century of leadership, right? Everything from graduating from the Naval Academy to proceeding being governor, bringing people together at a very difficult time during his short-lived administration. But mostly people look and hearken to the tremendous legacies built post-White House. And I think that's a lot of what you see in the bipartisan reach. It's somebody who's dedicated and committed to this country and served honorably for all of us. I think it's a testament to a foregone era when people really understood the importance of bringing people together. And I think it's wonderful to see that today.
A century of leadership. I like that. Joel, do you agree that it was a foregone era? Can we get back to that?
Oh, it would be wonderful to get back to that. You know, rare is the president in this modern era who their presidency, and look, people can have their disagreements about the Carter presidency. I actually think history has been a little bit unkind to it, but his post-presidency eclipsed that presidency. The work he did through the Carter Center, the work he did with Habitat for Humanity, and of course, as Leslie alluded to, his service in our country before that as a naval officer. It is quite the legacy, and I think the bipartisan tributes you're seeing are well-deserved for a life well lived.
I want to turn now to President Trump and his transition. Leslie, we're days away from Republicans selecting a Speaker of the House. What does Mike Johnson need to do to win over? We know that Trump just posted on Truth Social pledging his support for Johnson.
You know, it's really tremendous to see the rift again among Republicans, but I think we can look to history, recent history, as to what Speaker Johnson needs to say, that this illusion that there is somebody who could better serve the Republican conference right now is a mirage in the far distance. He is best equipped, most capable, excellent staff in place, and he has the support of the president-elect. I mean, the conference may have some naysayers, but the ability to do what Speaker Johnson has done in difficult times and to be the right arm of the president coming in is really a testament to his credential and capability. That's why I believe he is the right speaker, and he's going to continue to champion that message. And his lieutenants and deputies, his whips are definitely out there saying the same thing.
Joel, how will Democrats approach a potential speaker fight? Oh, it looks like we lost Joel. Leslie, let me ask you something that was interesting in how it unfolded, and that, of course, was the government funding deal and preventing that government shutdown in the 11th hour, literally. We know that Trump was demanding either the lifting of or the elimination of the debt ceiling. He didn't get that. He's still asking for that based on some of the policies that he wants to impose when he starts, including some tax cuts. How do you see this relationship between the former president, incoming president, and Republicans who not only echo his comments that the American people gave him this mandate, but that maybe didn't go along to everything that he was asking for in that funding fight?
There's a natural friction between the executive branch and obviously legislative. When we are in leadership, meaning Republicans, or you can argue either side is in leadership, is the best opportunity to move the biggest tenets of their agenda. And having that slight friction is a very healthy part of governance. But the alignment of the speaker on the president-elect's new agenda, particularly on tax cuts, on energy security, on border and immigration border security, are really a testament to how successful the administration is going to be. So while the president didn't want to have to deal with the debt ceiling, certainly that kind of political capital exchange, when he has bigger items on his radar, it just shows it's going to be this balance, right, between the two efforts. But this can be a sign of tremendous success in the president-elect's second term by having a champion who understands and can really, corral cats, which is a difficult task as Speaker of the House.
So, Joel, we have you back now. Leslie was talking about balance between congressional Republicans and the White House. But what about balance with Democrats? I mean, how do you see them not only engaging in a potential speaker fight, but also, as we see on day one, all of the things that President Trump wants to implement?
Yeah, well, I hope Democrats do better than my connection did there a second ago. Just interested, just opining on this speaker fight that you're talking about with Speaker Johnson. It's interesting to me that Republicans were elected to break things. There's a caucus full of people who don't believe in governing. I mean, literally, that entire Republican caucus is full of folks who want to break things, and Democrats like to govern. Democrats have a choice to make about whether or not they are going to help Mike Johnson. Because listen, if Mike Johnson is able to get reelected to the speakership, he's going to need Democratic support for some of the things that he needs to do. He's got too many folks in that Republican caucus who don't believe in governing and who typically like to be contrarian. So Democrats have a real choice point about whether or not they are going to participate in government. I think there are some on the Democratic side who want Democrats to maybe play a little bit more hardball politics, but I think there are others who feel like there are things that we can get done with Donald Trump as president and Mike Johnson as speaker. That'll be a very interesting tension to see play out.
Leslie, I'm out of time, but instead of break, would you say disrupt?
Disrupt. And if anybody who thinks that the Freedom Caucus is going to lead, as speaker, somebody from the Freedom Caucus is sadly mistaken. It's going to have to be somebody who can build alignment across the breadth of the Republican Party.
Leslie and Joel, good to see both of you. Thank you. Well, despite hope for a ceasefire in Gaza, the Israeli military carried out operations against Hamas targets over the weekend. Israel raided one of the last remaining hospitals in Gaza City. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more.
Israel's military says it is continuing to carry out operations in the area around Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza. Now, that hospital was the last major healthcare facility in northern Gaza, but was put out of service, partially burnt and destroyed following a raid by Israel's military on Friday. That's according to the World Health Organization. Israel's military claims the hospital was being used by militants and says it detained over 240 of them during the raid, including 15 who participated in the October 7th attacks. Israel says it also killed 20 militants during the operation and evacuated civilians from the area. Israel's military says it was one of the largest operations to detain militants since the beginning of the war in Gaza. But in a statement, the World Health Organization said, quote, "The systematic dismantling of the health system in Gaza is a death sentence for tens of thousands of Palestinians." Now, Israel has strongly denied that it is deliberately trying to destroy Gaza's healthcare system. Amnesty International, the human rights organization, says it is extremely worried about the director of the hospital, Dr. Hassam Abu Safia, who was detained by Israeli forces during the raid. Abu Safia's family members said in a statement that eyewitnesses saw the doctor forced to strip naked by Israel's military and then used as a human shield. Amnesty called on Israel to immediately release all health workers detained in Gaza. Back to you.
Holly, thank you. The U.S. just announced a new $2.5 billion aid package for Ukraine. It comes as the White House races to provide aid to Kyiv before President-elect Trump takes office next month. President Biden said providing Ukraine with the support it needs to prevail against the Russian invasion has been a top priority of his. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky celebrated the package, saying it's, quote, crucial to stabilizing the front lines. In Ethiopia, the death toll is rising after a truck full of passengers fell into a river. Government officials say at least 71 people were killed. At least 5 people are in critical condition. The accident happened yesterday, and many of the people on board were returning from a wedding ceremony. We are looking back at the life and legacy of former President Carter. Up next, we reflect on some of his most memorable accomplishments, both during his presidency and after he left the White House. Political leaders, heads of state, and Americans across the country are honoring the life of the 39th president, Jimmy Carter. Carter died Sunday at the age of 100. His single term in office is known for its focus on foreign policy, but he also redefined what it meant to carve out a legacy after leaving the White House. Yesterday, President Biden offered this praise for Carter.
The one thing I admired most about him, he thought and believed, and he really did believe this, and I do as well. Everybody deserves an even shot. No guarantees, just a shot.
Lindsay Travinsky joins us now. She's a presidential historian and executive director of the George Washington Presidential Library. Lindsay, always good to see you. Walk us through Carter's rise to the national stage, going from being a farmer in Plains, Georgia, to a little-known one-term governor all the way to the White House.
Yeah, absolutely. It was in some ways a really meteoric rise. He was born in Athens, Georgia, which is still an incredibly small town, was educated at the local public school, was in the Navy, which is where he got his degree. And of course, once he had graduated, he married Rosalind Carter, which he said was his greatest accomplishment and the best decision he ever made. He had to ultimately leave the Navy and go back and take care of his family business and family farm after his father died, and did so with great success. He was a nuclear engineer and incredibly brilliant. He then ran for the Georgia State Senate, which was his first introduction to politics. He had one unsuccessful bid for governor before then actually having a successful campaign, and then was really catapulted into the national spotlight. I think because what he offered was exactly what the nation was looking for in the post-Watergate years, which was that he did not seem to represent the corruption and the DC insiderness of the Nixon years, but instead was decent and honest and represented, I think, a moral change.
We'll talk about his legacy after the White House in a second, but what do you see as some of the defining moments of his 4 years in office?
Well, there are pros and cons like every administration. I think in the pros column, he was an outspoken advocate for civil rights, women's rights, human rights around the globe and at home. He had a very impressive environmental record, which was really ahead of his time. He was the first president to have solar panels on top of the White House. He also was, of course, famous for helping foster peace in the Middle East. The Camp David Accords are probably one of his best known successes. And he did so by literally not letting people leave Camp David for 13 days. He basically commandeered all of the limousines so they couldn't find a way out. On the negative side, he was really struggled with the economy. Inflation was incredibly high and interest rates were really high as well. Prices were out of control. Gasoline was in short supply. And then the Iran hostage crisis, his inability to get them home, the failure of the rescue mission, these absolutely were things that people held against him.
What about his legacy after he left the White House? How did he define that period?
I think this is perhaps the most remarkable part about Carter, because we tend to talk about his post-presidential years more than anything else. And that's a real rarity for a former president. It's really hard for them to sort of overcome that first line of their biography. And instead, we remember him as this amazing humanitarian, someone who was dedicated to the eradication of disease around the world, housing, civil rights, human rights, women's rights. These are things that he dedicated his life to, as well as continuing to teach Sunday school at his local church and being a dedicated neighbor and family member and husband. And so that legacy is, I think, one that really deserves celebration of what it means to be a true civil servant.
Lindsay Travinsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A thrilling overtime win sends the Washington Commanders to the NFL playoffs. Up next, a look at the action from around the league. It's a tall order for the Detroit Lions this week. They must win tonight against the 49ers in San Francisco and again Sunday night against the Vikings in order to clinch the NFC North title. Last night, the Commanders clinched their first playoff spot since 2020 with a dramatic overtime win over the Falcons. Washington QB Jaden Daniels connected with tight end Zach Ertz for a 2-yard game-winning touchdown. For more on this dramatic Week 17 and beyond, I want to bring in Shannon McCarriston. She covers the NFL for CBS Sports. Shannon, thanks for being here. So what stood out to you from Week 17?
So Week 17, I felt like we were spoiled. There were so many good games, and we had those 2 overtime games. One of them that you mentioned, I think Jaden Daniels is on his campaign for Offensive Rookie of the Year, and punching that ticket to the playoffs the first time the Commanders have been in the playoffs since 2020 was the perfect icing on the cake for him. Then we had the Broncos and the Bengals, which I was on the edge of my seat that whole time. Joe Burrow just will not quit. The Bengals, against all odds, have kept those playoff hopes alive. And it was really impressive to watch them take down the Broncos in that back and forth game.
So after Sunday's games and with 1 week left in the regular season, what are you looking at this coming weekend?
So next week has a lot on the line, not only for playoff contention, but for the NFL draft, for the seeding. But the game that I'm the most excited for is Lions and Vikings. Right now, those teams only have 4 losses between them, which is pretty unheard of, not just for a big matchup, but they're in the same division. So that one team could be the number 1 seed, one team could be the number 5 seed. That's a pretty big difference. One gets the bye and one might not get home field, down the stretch. So I'm really looking forward to that. I have high expectations, so they better not disappoint.
How is the race shaping shaping up for MVP?
So Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are those two names we've heard thrown around the most, but it's actually Joe Burrow who leads the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Now his team is 8-8. They might not make the playoffs. So a lot of times voters want to get that player in who is leading their team to the postseason. But I think Josh Allen gets it. I think Lamar Jackson might deserve it. And I think Joe Burrow should be getting more credit for it. So we have a really tight race this year. It's pretty exciting. Lamar already has 2 MVPs, but that shouldn't count against him. I've heard every take from they should have co-MVPs to Lamar shouldn't get it because he already has 2. That's not how this works. So I think, if anything, we could get a 3-way tie, but that's not how this works. I think Josh Allen is getting it. But all 3 of those players have been exceptional this year. And the Bengals aren't in this position without Joe Burrow. And that is really what an MVP is. But Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are playing out of their minds. So it's been an exciting year of football for sure. And we wrap up next week.
Shannon McHarrison, thank you so much for bringing some enthusiasm to this. I love it.
Thank you.
Minnesota Timberwolves star Anthony Edwards has been fined $100,000 by the NBA for using profanity during a live television interview. The penalty was for remarks he made Friday after his team beat the Rockets by 1 point. It's his second penalty in just 2 weeks. On December 23rd, he was fined $75,000 for using profane language while he criticized game officials. And Edwards was fined $35,000 in November for making an obscene gesture on the court. Well, controversy at a chess championship in New York has been averted after a top-ranked player will now be allowed to wear jeans. Magnus Carlsen was fined and denied a late-round game at another tournament on Friday for refusing to change his pants. Chess's governing body is loosening its dress code so the 34-year-old grandmaster can compete beginning today in the World Blitz Championship, a speed version of the sport. Well, before we go, another story that reflects the kindness and character of Jimmy Carter. After his time in office, the former president strapped on a tool belt and helped build more than 4,000 homes for Americans across the country. Olivia Leach spoke to some families in Texas who got a chance to work alongside him.
A few years after President Jimmy Carter left the White House, he and Mrs. Carter found a new mission in Habitat for Humanity.
He was certainly a humanitarian. He put politics aside once he left the White House and just did good for the common man.
Since 1984, the Carters have been volunteering with Habitat for Humanity worldwide, raising awareness about the need for affordable housing.
The minute he lent his name to Habitat for Humanity, we were on the map.
For more than 35 years, President Carter and Mrs. Carter built and renovated at least 4,000 homes, including many right here in North Texas back in 2014.
He was there. He was swinging a hammer right alongside them. It was a week that we'll never forget. He wasn't there to take pictures, and he certainly wasn't there to sign autographs. He was there to build a home,
including 20 homes on the east side of Fort Worth.
And ours was #1, and they called it the Carter House because President Carter himself worked on it.
Homeowner Jacqueline Wills remembers what it was like.
It was such an honor to have him and his wife here working with us. I will never forget that, and I'll be totally indebted to him for the rest of our life.
Habitat for Humanity's work to deliver the gift of homeownership continues here in North Texas, and President Carter's legacy lives on in each new home they build.
Everything we do is to make a difference in somebody else's life, and he taught us that. He lived it.
In Fort Worth, Olivia Leach, CBS News, Texas.
Stay with us as we continue our look at the life of Jimmy Carter as America reflects on the 39th president's faith and legacy of service. You're watching CBS News 24/7.